Hello, everybody. My name is Monte, and I'm a middle school science teacher in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Sarah Moon, she, her pronouns, a modern classroom expert mentor, an elementary instructional coach, and interventionist in Durham, North Carolina. Tavia has taken the month off, but she'll be back here next month.
Sarah and I are super excited to have everyone here today to talk about routines and procedures. But before we get into kind of our topic of the day, we really just want to shout out all of the members in the Facebook group who are continually sharing resources. Modern Classroom would not be what it is without those of you who create and share things. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely. All right, so for our season 2, episode 2, we are talking all about routines and procedures. So just so that way we have some common language as we're talking about this, when we talk about routines and procedures, we're talking about a sequence of actions that are regularly followed in quote unquote a official way of doing something. And these can be really important in helping our classrooms run smoothly, making sure that our learners understand expectations, that they can access instruction, but they also understand how to collaborate with one another. We've had some great resource shares of a couple of routines and procedures within our Facebook group, so we want to go ahead and lift those up. Here's some common routines and procedures that we see. A lot of times we have sequential lessons that lead to mastery. Thank you to our Facebook member, RJ Roltinga, for this image. You can see they have a bulletin board that really outlines for students how are they going to get that mastery, having that routine, so that way students are able to see that clear expectation. Progress tracking can also really help students not only understand where they are, but also encourage collaboration. We just released our first Facebook guide. And so if you're looking to have some more information on how to make progress trackers like this, definitely check that out by clicking guides at the top of our Facebook group. You can also check out season 1 of Keeping Up with Modern Classrooms, where we did a whole episode on progress trackers. And thank you for our Facebook member for sharing out this image. Another fabulous one from Amy in our Facebook group is how we can go ahead and use those soft deadlines to not only encourage those work study skills, but goal setting. So you can see we have what our on pace is, where should they be at the end of the week, and also those unit deadlines. So setting that procedure for how to pace within the week can be very helpful for our students, along with having a routine to gain assistance. So we know that our students are going to need help. What's the best way for them to ask that? And thank you, Zuri, for this image. You can see that they have a stop and ask 3 before me, and they also have a couple of different levels of questioning. You can also check out our new series, MCP Teacher Hacks, on our Facebook group. I just released one about Open Table, which is another routine to gain assistance. Also allowing learners to independently access materials. It can be a lot of materials sometimes, whether you're in a traditional classroom or a modern classroom. So making sure that there's a clear routine in place and that your students know and practice that routine, so that way everything is organized. You can see Kelly shared this one out. They have these like page protectors, and so that way whenever they need a lesson handout, they can just go and grab it from there. So lots of common routines and procedures. Monte and I are going to kind of dig into some commonly asked questions that we see about routines and procedures. So Monte, here is our first question. What routines and procedures should I have in my class? Monte, take us away.
Yes, I'm going to give a very philosophical answer and say the routines and procedures you should have in your class are the ones that you want. But I'm also going to give you a much better answer than that. Meaning, I don't think there's a right and wrong set of procedures to have, but some that I think are useful: an opening and closing routine. So how do you want your students to enter the classroom? How do you want them to pack up and leave the classroom? And model those things with them, like spend time really having them work through it, and asking them what they see you doing, what they see other classmates doing. Super important. I think having, like Sarah said earlier, procedure for them being able to ask questions, because what you don't want to happen is 8 kids have questions. You're trying to check in with like 8 other kids, and then your principal walks in. It's like the worst. because those 8 kids that have questions, I promise you, they're probably sitting and doing nothing, and it looks really bad. So figure out some sort of system for asking questions, and just things that I've seen just through mentoring is, using kind of the board thing, like what we showed earlier. Some people use kind of like an online platform called Classroom Q, I think it's called, where kids could kind of sign up. I've seen people use like a ticket system, like you're at the DMV. But just making sure you have some sort of plan so that kids are able to ask questions. Obviously I don't want to take up so much time. I want to give Sarah an opportunity, but I think those to me are like just glaringly the biggest ones to start off with. And then other things I think come after that.
Yeah, and before I share, Monte, because I know everybody's going to want to know, what is your system for having students ask questions?
My system for having students ask questions is I write on the board. So I actually divide my board into kind of like 3 columns, like I think very similar to the example, but column 1 just says, I need immediate help. And we practice what immediate help means. Immediate help is not like, I just really want you to talk to me first. It's like, if you actually cannot move forward, you put your name there. The middle column is kind of like, I have a question or I need help, but it can wait. And then the third column is like less priority, but for my students who want to check in or are ready for a check-in, they just kind of put their name there. And it allows for me to prioritize, obviously starting with like the most important questions and then working my way through there. Because sometimes kids do have questions that like need to be answered in the moment, but and I think too, in doing this, I also really condition them on like, what's a question that you say for Miss Woodard and what's a question that you ask a peer, and then couple with that bathroom usage, because sometimes kids will hold their hand up like forever. And I'm like, why you got your hand up? They're like, oh, I just have to use the bathroom. I'm like, your hand's been up for 12 minutes to go to the bathroom. So I think also just being mindful though of those things that kids will do if you don't like tell them not to.
Yeah, I think you said a lot of good things, Monte. And I think your example of like the tiered questions is a great example of how these routines and procedures can really transfer over into life and work skills too, right? Because like it's a really important skill to know, do I actually need to ask this question, right? Even us as teachers, right? Do I need to go to admin right now with this question? Or is there somewhere I can look for the answer? Is there a team member? And so I think that's just a great example of how, we're not just doing routines and procedures for our class, we're doing routines and procedures for their life. Another thing, Monte, that you said that I really liked is, have the routines and procedures that are important to you. And sometimes it might be, if you think of something and when you think of it in a certain way, you probably need a routine and procedure for that. I am that teacher that absolutely hates the pencil sharpener. I cannot stand it. I have a very nice pencil sharpener that I love dearly with my life. Like one time it jammed and I brought it home to my husband almost in tears. And I was like, can you fix this? It's so good. And he did, don't worry. But like, I cannot stand the pencil sharpener. So I am that teacher that will sharpen 25 pencils at the beginning of class and it does not go on during class because that is a routine that is important to me. And so I teach the kids, and it's not because Miss Moon hates you that she won't let you sharpen your pencil. It's not because Miss Moon is mean that she won't let you sharpen the pencil, but Miss Moon literally cannot stand the sound of that pencil sharpener. And so just like you said, just that's important to me. So we have a routine and procedure. Once we practice it a couple times, the kiddos know. They'll even start calling out, week 2, kid will start walking towards the pencil sharpener. They're like, no. And I'm like, thank you for saving my sanity.
And see, yeah. related to that, my procedure is just can't sharpen your pencil when someone is speaking because it's disrespectful. But I actually don't care about it if we're doing independent work or there's not a video playing or someone talking. You do you. Go sharpen your pencil. But we have to practice this though. Of like you can't sharpen your pencil when someone's in the middle of a sentence because it drowns out everything. Yeah. And all it really takes is one kid doing it for us all to just like turn and stare at them, and then it really doesn't have to like beyond that.
Yeah. And I think too, just you keep on bringing up the word practice. And I think that's really important. We have to explicitly practice. And I think also it's really important to model the non-example, right? And I've done this, even with high school kids, they find it really funny. So, you mentioned like coming into class, there's a specific way that you want them to come into class, model that, but then also model the non-example, and you can be really silly and the kiddos really like it, even if they're older learners, so, with the pencil sharpening during it, I would talk about, you could do, maybe one of your students is talking and then all of a sudden you go and you jam a pencil in there, right? And then like that way they can really see that non-example. And I think that can just be a way to, again, just really making sure that that learners are not only understanding of that routine and procedure, but that they also just really understand it. Okay, let's go ahead and move to the next one, which you kind of touched on. So I'll go ahead and start with this one about how do we begin class. I think beginning class can look different for different people. And I think this difference really shows whether you're in an elementary self-contained classroom or if you're in a classroom that has multiple subjects. So for me personally at the elementary range, because I always started off class and I had my kiddos all day, we would kind of start off class thinking about all day. So I had a do now that kiddos had as they came in. It was a mix of social emotional learning check-in and goal setting. So my kiddos went ahead and put how they were feeling. We're a zones of regulation school. So they'd go ahead and note their zone, and then they'd go ahead and put whether they were on pace or behind pace in each of our subjects. And then they'd set their goal for today. And with their goal for today, I think one of the things that was really useful with mine, and that's been really powerful, is in addition to writing the goal, they also had to check off the strategies that they were going to choose to get to that goal. And so some of the strategies would be like putting my phone on Miss Moon's table, or not talking to peers until I finish a lesson, or not using headphones for my music, stuff like that. And that was really powerful because they chose that, right? And so they would keep the slip of paper on their desk throughout their time. And if I went around and if Monte had said, I'm not going to talk to peers until I get back on pace, and Monte's talking to peers, I can go around and be like, Monte, what did you put on this paper?
I would probably talk to peers.
Exactly. And then I could be like, Monte, this is not reaching your goal, right? Because then that's a learner initiated goal. So that's kind of how I began my day, I guess. In terms of beginning class, I know I typically start whole group, at least 10-ish minutes where we kind of get ourselves together. And I typically like to do some kind of collaborative activity at the beginning. In math, it's typically like a whole group word problem that we can kind of work together. Reading, we might look at a passage, but I do think it can be very powerful starting whole group to get that collaboration in play and just to make sure that everybody's on the right track. What about you, Monte? How do you typically begin class?
Very similarly, actually. I was just marveling at, you said, have them all day, and I don't know how y'all elementary school teachers do it because I just cannot. But I start off very similarly of like whole class. Like we start off whole class every day with some sort of warm up. So, and again, this is a routine and a procedure. Maybe I'm using those words wrong. I don't know which one means what. But again, we practice at the beginning of like, how do we enter the class? They know they come in, they're quiet, they sit down, they take out their notebook, they answer the warm up. Like they know these things. They know in the first 5 minutes, that's when you sharpen your pencil theoretically, and do all of those things. And then, we do a warm up. And so one of the things I get through mentoring all the time, I teach science. So people are always like, well, what is your warm ups? If everyone's on a different pace, how the heck are you doing a warm up every day? Well, it really depends. So sometimes warm-ups are content-based in that I can, especially if it's like the start of a new lesson or something, I could probably pull out some sort of like engagement question. But a lot of times they're actually like soft skills. So one of the biggest things that kids can't do well in a science classroom at the middle school level is read graphs. They're terrible at it. So the New York Times actually has a segment called What's Up with This Graph? And kids look at graphs and they evaluate what's going on with it. And so I do that, or I did in the past, at least. I haven't used it this year, but I do that once a week and have them kind of look at graphs. Maybe there's like an SEL check-in. Maybe there's like a blog post. One year I was really into blogs and like having them that do blogs. So I think there's a lot of flexibility in what you can do, but I think really having it set that first 5 minutes is like warm up or some sort of independent, like short activity before we share out as a whole class. It really helps center kids of like where we need to be. And I know for me, when I first started rolling out Modern Classroom, I know one of the biggest concerns we get is like the chaos. And one of the things that was super necessary for like one of my classes in particular was they just needed to sit in like silence for like 7 to 10 minutes. It really varied. 7 to 10 minutes every day to really get their head straight and be like, oh, we're in science now. We need to turn off our math brain, or we need to like turn off what happened in this class. And normally after like 7 to 10 minutes, they were like good enough where I could release them to go do the other stuff. And that's why I think the the warm up is really important because they need to like center themselves. That's like my biggest thing. Let's center ourselves, guys. That's what I tell them all the time.
Yeah, I think centering is so important because I mean, I even remember transitioning. My high school was huge and we had 4 minutes in between classes. I'm running from floor 1 all the way up to floor 3, 100 yards away. And then I'm supposed to just get going. Like that's a lot. And I think our
4 minutes
kiddos are the
is
same
so
way.
little. We have
Oh,
10
yeah.
minute transitions this
10-minute transitions.
I
Lord
know.
have mercy. Oh no, I had.
And the kids show up early. It's counterintuitive. They show up early, like 7 minutes early.
And I had 4 minutes, and just like as a little tangent, for me to get to my Spanish class, which was out in a modular, it was literally half a mile. That was like back when it fit. It's like we booked it, and that was like bathrooms, everything.
Yeah,
Had to get it all together. I really was. I mean, now I think about it, I'm like, oh, I can do it anyway. But yeah, I think the centering is super important. I think that's super important in elementary too, because you do have them all day, and it can be kind of, for lack of a better word, a little wonky, right? Because we're just like, okay, we're moving into this subject. So I do think having some sort of coming together, centering whole group activity can be super powerful. All right, let's go ahead and move to our last question, which is how can I make sure that my modern classroom runs as smoothly as possible for myself and my learners? Monte, you want to start us off?
Look, the only answer to this question is practice. I promise you that it is not going to feel good until you've just done it. Even if you have the best routines in the world, even if you have the strongest classroom management in the world, even if you've planned out everything to a T, they're kids and they don't always respond in the way that we want them to. And unfortunately, for the type A people who are like me, who are like, no, they need to do the thing. It's really hard hearing that. When I first started doing this, I was part of the fellowship that no longer exists, but Kareem and Robert would come, once a month, and they would look at my class and I would be freaking out because I'm like, it's going horribly. And they would come look and they were like, this is great. And I just think it takes practice, because with practice comes confidence. And in order for it to go smoothly, you have to fully believe that you can do this stuff. And the kids have to see that you also like feel confident enough to do it. And eventually it starts running like a well-oiled machine, but it doesn't happen overnight. And it just takes time and practice. And I know it's hard for us as educators to be like, I can't take time out of my very scripted curriculum and time to like really get this time to work. But I promise, if you practice and you just continue with it, it will eventually get to a point where it kind of functions on its own. Like, I'm pretty sure I've told this story before, but I just never forget, being late coming back from a field trip. My students didn't have a teacher, and I walked in, and like the 11 kids that were in there, they were all sitting down working. Not a peep. Nobody was saying anything. They were all working on task. And I just will never forget that. It's just a testament of like, when you do it and they get there, it will make sense. But that was like February. It definitely would not have worked this well in October. So just stick with it, I guess, is the big thing for me.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like the payout is huge. For some of y'all know, but my background is in special ed, specifically emotional behavioral disorder. So that means that admin is always very strategic with which students they put in my homeroom. And so when I first implemented modern classrooms, just like you, Monte, I'll never forget, there was a time that like I was about to call another small group, but then I realized like everybody was working and nobody was upset and nobody was having a meltdown and everybody was at their own pace. And it was just like, oh my, like this is the classroom that you dream of, right? Like every single student learning and being engaged in learning. And I finally had it. And I think as well, being reflective to make sure that it goes smoothly, right? Like taking that time in the middle of your class and just honestly stare for 2 minutes. What's going well? What can I see? Where are the little hurdles? And then having that conversation with students too. I'm a big believer in the plus delta with students. And so plus is just like a plus for plus. And then delta is the Greek sign delta, which means change. And so a lot of times I typically do it at the end of each week, but when I first started rolling out, we did it every single day. What was something that we did well on? What's something that we could improve on? And then the next day I would just put it in the corner of my board and we would refer to that throughout the next day. Hey guys, we talked about transitions need to be smoother. That's what we're trying to reach for. And I think also when you have those conversations with kiddos and with your learners, you'll realize that some of the things that you don't think are going smoothly actually are going smoothly. I mean, there's been times, you know, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have all these mastery checks to check. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, guys, I'm late. And I still remember one of my kids was like, it's cool, we've just moved on. I was like, oh yeah, you have, great.
Yeah, that's like a super important point. I think sometimes when we're in this, we forget about the pitfalls of traditional teaching as well. Like traditional teaching does not always go well. And so I see people sometimes freaking out of like, I'm going to revert back to my traditional class. And I'm like, I don't know about you, but there have been some days where traditional teaching has made me want to quit my job because it was so bad, you know? And so what I tell people all the time of like, the grass is not greener. That's all I would say. Like the grass is not greener on either side of this. Like I'm not necessarily preaching for MCP, but I'm just saying when you're feeling like it's not going well, remember that your traditional class probably had days where it didn't go well either. Because again, like I said, they're children and they have minds of their own and they don't do what we want them to.
I think that's so important. And you said it before, it's so easy to get caught up in it, but I think taking that reflective step back and then just thinking about being specific too. Like, you know, if you feel like it's not going smoothly, choose one area, focus on that one area before you move to another. So if it's mastery checks, focus on mastery checks. Once you get mastery checks good, then move on to the other things. So that way we don't burn out. All right, well, Monte, I feel like this has been a fabulous conversation. I think this is time for us to go ahead and share with our fabulous viewers that next month we will be focusing on experiential learning. So thinking about that inquiry-based learning, problem-based learning, all of that. How do we make experiential learning work within a modern classroom? Be sure to check out our show notes as well of this current episode. There's a podcast all about opening and closing routines with quite a few resources as well for you to check out.
And the Facebook group in case you're not actually a part of it.
Exactly. And speaking of the Facebook group for highlights, best practices, and updates from modern classrooms and educators across the world, please make sure that you followed us on social media, including our Facebook group, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. There's tons of information always shared, and we absolutely love seeing everybody that joins.
And don't forget that every month, the first Wednesday of each month, we do a Twitter chat at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you are into Twitter or you're not into Twitter, you should join us for our Twitter chat next month.
Absolutely. You can be like me. I only join Twitter on the first Wednesday of every single month. And other than that, I never check the app, but it's always a great conversation. All right, everyone. So that is a wrap for our show this month. Thank you so much for joining us today and supporting us over the last year as we've tweaked and made changes to the Facebook group. We are so grateful for every single one of you and so grateful for all that you do for your students, your school, and your community every single day.
See y'all next month.